Hello, and welcome to Monday Bagel, the podcast where we explore the intersection of law, technology, and society. I'm your host, Michał Jackowski, and today I'm joined by Gabe Pereyra, co-founder and president of Harvey, one of the most discussed and ambitious AI platforms transforming the legal profession. Gabe's background combines deep technical expertise with a vision for how AI can fundamentally reshape legal work. Harvey, launched in collaboration with OpenAI and adopted by many of the world's leading law firms, was built to supercharge legal work, but it has become much more than that. Recently, Harvey has closed a new funding round led by Andreessen Horowitz, valuing the legal AI company at over $8 billion. Gabe, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start with the story behind Harvey. Most of lawyers know it, but some may be curious how it began. What inspired you to create Harvey? What did you see in the legal world that made you believe AI could make a real difference?
I would say kind of the biggest motivation for going into legal was actually my co-founder, Winston. So Winston and I, before starting the company, were best friends, roommates. We had met through mutual friends, became best friends very quickly, and never thought we would start a company together. My background's mainly AI research, so I had worked at Google Brain, Google DeepMind. I was working at Meta's large language model team, and I had always wanted to do a startup based around AI and deep learning. And I think it was more important to me the societal impact and the technology than the actual industry or vertical. And I had always been looking for what is the right area to apply this technology. And at the time, I was brainstorming some startup ideas with a bunch of friends from Google. And they were over at Winston and I's place, and Winston said, "Why don't you build a legal assistant?" And he showed us a bunch of his legal tech and the work he was doing. He did litigation out of Melviny at the time. And when I saw that and all the kind of complex textual reasoning that lawyers were doing, this just seemed like the perfect application. And when we started Harvey, only GPT-3 existed, and they weren't quite good enough to do high-end corporate legal work that we now do with these big law firms. And so we were looking at consumer applications and access to justice and things like that. And then when we raised from OpenAI and they gave us early access to GPT-4, that was kind of when we had this light bulb moment of this was really able to help Winston with a lot of the work he had done at a large law firm. And that was kind of where the direction that we're going now kind of took off.
Are you still friends after these years?
Yeah, no, we like to joke. I feel like starting a company with someone is kind of like a marriage, and so it's just like I think the most important thing for this company is having that really strong relationship, and it's obviously hard scaling a company. It's super stressful, but I think it brings you closer.
Okay, Harvey was created to supercharge legal work. When you think about Harvey's mission today, is it still about augmentation or has it already become something closer to new legal infrastructure or even new way of performing the legal profession?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think of our long-term mission of Harvey, I think there's kind of three main aspects. So there is how do we help large law firms and their clients? Eventually, I think part of the mission is also how do you help consumers or society? And so we're doing some work on working with court systems and things like that in Singapore and eventually access to justice. But what I would say the platform has evolved is when we first started, we were trying to build copilots for individual lawyers. And now we're shifting much more towards the goal is really not to make individual lawyers more effective. It is how do you make entire teams of lawyers working on a client matter? And especially how do you make entire law firms more profitable? And so I think it's kind of to what you're saying of what is the infrastructure and platform that these law firms will need to deliver services with this new technology in the next decade.
So collaboration is your main goal, isn't it?
We see collaboration as a big part of it. I think there's probably two main focuses. One is for the internal of a law firm. How do you build them we call it the Matter OS, but basically an operating system that allows them to deploy Gen AI effectively within the law firm. And I think the big problem you need to solve there is right now, Harvey and all of these other Gen AI products, it's still quite difficult to get them the right context, right? You need to go and upload all these documents, connect them to data sources. And eventually, the experience that you want as an attorney is you should be able to go into Harvey and you should be able to select the client matter you're working on and say you're working on a litigation. You pick that litigation and then you ask a query like, can you take a first draft of our motion for summary judgment? And then Harvey is able to pull from iManage, from Lexis, from your e-discovery corpus, from all of the data and the work your team has done to help you with that task. And so we're building that now. And then, like you said, for most of these client matters, a huge part of doing that work is also how do you collaborate with the client that you're serving on that client matter. And so we're starting to also do a lot of work there where we're starting to see these law firms build workflows, build playbooks, share vaults, and start sharing the Gen AI systems that they are building in Harvey directly with their clients. And so these are kind of the two big directions, but we think collaboration will be a very big part of it.
It's amazing. I'm a practitioner myself, except for being a podcaster and professor of law. So I tested Harvey and it makes amazing job. But we often hear AI won't replace lawyers, it will assist them. What Harvey does today, for me, it's performing a large portion of junior and sometimes mid-level legal work, workflows, collaboration, templates, research, drafting. These are some of them only, but many more features. How do you reconcile this narrative with what is actually happening in the market with Harvey, but with other tools as well?
Yeah. I think the nature of the work will change. So I think the wrong way to think about this technology is that the legal agents that Harvey is building are just drop-in replacements for a first-year associate. And so I think actually a good analogy is if you think of what happened when we invented the internet and personal computers, at the time, the job of a junior associate was go to the library and find this case law. And now that work you just don't bill for because you use something like Lexis. And so I think now there is a bunch of parts of the job that these models will do and the nature of work will change. But our sense of what we're seeing and what's going to happen is the same way that when the internet and personal computers came out, I think a lot of people at the time said, oh, humans will work less, you maybe need less lawyers. And you actually saw the opposite, right? You had significantly more legal work, significantly more lawyers. And the reason is because the world alongside got so much more complex. And I think that's going to happen here. And the parts that I don't think you will replace is collaborating with your clients, figuring out what they need. And then I think a lot of the expertise will shift into the same way as you get more senior. As a lawyer, you stop doing a lot of the day-to-day low-level work, and your work becomes much more of how do I guide and coordinate all of my associates and my legal team. I think lawyers will just develop that skill sooner, and they'll learn to manage a larger workforce of both associates and agents. And so our sense is like this isn't going to be a replacement, but the work will get more complex. You can do it at scale or at an even larger scale. And so I think the work will just change.
I partly agree. I recently heard a statistic from Brazil where AI was embedded into some judicial proceedings. 70% of judges and lawyers use it, and the number of cases increased by 50%. This is amazing statistics.
Brett Taylor, who does a similar company but for customer service, has a really good analogy to this, where right now, if you call customer service, sometimes it's not a great experience. But if you could talk with AI and when you need a human, you can hand it off to a human and that experience was 10 times better. What he's seeing is exactly what you said of, oh, you actually call customer support more. And so I think you'll see this happen where if you can provide higher quality legal services for the same price, what we're seeing is the demand for legal service will actually just go up.
Hopefully. Harvey is built on top of foundation models. You mentioned GPT-3, 4, now probably 5, but the foundation models evolve extremely fast. Does this create a strategic business risk for you that once these underlying models become commoditized and the real competitive edge shifts elsewhere?
Yeah. I think from when we started the company, we always had a strong view on these models will continue to improve. And so we really need to think about what is a business we can build that addresses this. And I think there's maybe a couple points. One is I think what you're starting to see is the benefits of pre-training are slowing down. We have largely put all of the public data that we have into these models. And so now what a lot of the research labs and we're starting to do is the next step, which is take these really strong pre-trained models and build reasoning agents. But I think where you're going to see the next wave of performance come from is how do you leverage private data to train these systems? And so our bet has always been that you will see the foundation models continue to improve the general purpose model's ability to do all types of work, programming, legal services, everything. But most of the expertise is actually locked up in these law firms and with client data. And so if you think of these very large law firms, they can't actually take all of that data and put that in a public model, and they can't even put it in our model. They can't even put it in their model. What really needs to happen is they need to figure out how to train these models alongside their clients. And so think of encoding the relationships they have with their clients into models and agents. I think that's one piece. And then the second piece for us is we think a lot of the benefit of the platform actually comes not from the models, but all of the infrastructure you build around them. The same way, the main challenge with, or one of the large challenges of building a law firm is not just hiring associates, it's how do you organize all of those attorneys? How do you make them profitable? And so when we think of a lot of the infrastructure we need to build, simply the models improving in performance by 20% doesn't increase the profitability of a law firm by 20% or the revenue by 20%. And so you need to figure out what is the technology you can build for these law firms that helps convert this increase in model performance into business performance. And so I think that's things like, how do you manage all these matters? How do you structure them more effectively? How do you collaborate with your clients? How do you provide services in new ways? And a lot of those technical problems have nothing to do with model performance. Increasingly, the way that you customize these software systems will not be by writing code. It will be by training the underlying AI systems. And so if you think of right now how you post-train ChatGPT so that it acts the way you want, really what you're doing is you have a bunch of humans have conversations with it and give it feedback on those conversations. And that's what takes these raw pre-trained models and turns them into this consumer experience like ChatGPT. And we've been doing the same thing with lawyers, where you want to ask these models questions and then have lawyers provide these are the correct answers or feedback. And if you think of what law firms are incredibly good at doing, it is how do they work on very complex client matters, decompose those into sub-problems, delegate those to associates, have those associates produce work product, give them feedback. And so from that process, that is where a lot of actually we think the customization is going to come. And so what we want to build is all of the infrastructure and tools for each law firm to be able to do this and differentiate in the way they think is best. And so we see a lot of our value of how do we give these law firms leverage so they don't need to build kind of the same size technical org we do to provide a lot of this infrastructure.
And what about the market of thousands of specialized startups? They are active on this market. I was in Legal Tech Talks, one of the biggest legal tech conference in Europe, and I saw like 500, at least 500 firms trying to compete with Harvey. Where do you position Harvey in this landscape? As a platform, ecosystem, legal operating system, maybe?
Yeah, I think that all of those are a good way to describe it. I think one of the big challenges we're seeing CIOs at law firms face right now is exactly what you mentioned. There's so many different vendors, all their capabilities overlap, each have different security and data architectures. And so even just solving the problem of, can I use all of these vendors with my different clients and their restrictions is a massive headache. And so part of what we want to solve is, can we build that platform ecosystem legal OS layer that we can plug all of these other tools into while giving these law firms the peace of mind that ethical walls are set up correctly, client data isn't getting leaked or isn't going into the wrong models, these tools aren't training on the data they shouldn't be, but we still think there's a massive opportunity for very specialized tools. And our goal is not to build all of these tools. We don't want to build, case law data sets. We don't want to build DMSs. We've seen really great specialized patent tools and drafting tools. And if you think of where a lot of these reasoning models are going, the more tools you can equip these models with, the more powerful they are. And so we want to help connect all of our tools to all of these great startups that other folks are building.
And what is the biggest misconception lawyers still have about Harvey? The one thing you wish the market understood better? You can explain it right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good sense of what's a big misconception. I
Is
think
there
probably
any? Maybe there is
yeah,
no, no.
I think probably the biggest is still I think folks are thinking about what we're building as a copilot rather than this broader platform.
Mhm.
And so I think the thing we feel strongly is where this is going is eventually you need to build these secure environments for law firms and their clients to collaborate. And a lot of the value will come from um, how do you enable firms to differentiate in these collaborative environments? And so I think we've moved kind of from when we started the company 3 years ago of building kind of these co-pilots for individual lawyers to starting to solve problems for the entire law firm and all of their clients. And maybe that's kind of the biggest shift that the folks we don't talk with us closely haven't seen.
Maybe I can give you a hint. I'm quite involved in AI world, but before I tested Harvey, I thought about it as a maybe more secure ChatGPT
Yeah.
for design for lawyers with special work, maybe UX for lawyers, but nothing more. And I was pretty amazed after I tested it how many features it has.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. That feels like maybe the biggest misconception where people, I think, especially when we started the company, thought about the tool as ChatGPT for lawyers. And at the start, that's what it was. We got early access to GPT-4, and the models were so amazing that we said, okay, let's just give this to lawyers and then see what they do with it. And we had enough partners, CIOs use this and say, oh, wow, this can draft, really interesting documents. It still makes mistakes, but there's something interesting here. And then the past 3 years have been putting all of the technology around it. And so early on, a lot of the challenges we faced is, hey, this doesn't have access to case law. This doesn't have access to my private documents. And so we've partnered now with Lexis, Walters Kluwer, I manage NetDocs. And so connecting the models and the reasoning agents with a lot of the different tools that it needs. And then I think the big next step is once you have this system that the same way an associate can use all of these tools to produce work product for a partner, the big next step is as a lawyer, you're not working by yourself on a client matter. It's what is all of the collaborative functionality you need to work with your team. And I think there's a bunch of work there because I think one of the big challenges that law firms face, and the reason, like a big reason for the legal tech industry in general, is for most companies, all of the data you work on, or a lot of it is your internal data. And so if you think of what Copilot, ChatGPT are building, they want to connect these models to all of the company data so you can use all the tools. I think the big challenge for these law firms is their operating style is completely different than most companies, except other professional service providers. And it's really, I have 10,000 clients, and for each of them, I have a data set that I'm working on. And so I think a lot of the technical problem we're solving is how do you deal with that?
And how do you see the division of labor evolving in law firms? At what point it becomes supervision of AI rather than AI assistants, or maybe lawyers cooperating with multiple AI agents are the future of legal profession? Maybe solo entrepreneurs armed with AI? What's your prediction?
I think you will actually just see a continuation of the trend today. So if you remove Gen AI and you think of how large law firms operate today, as you get more senior as an attorney, the majority of your job is talking to clients and then supervising attorneys. I don't think that changes, especially at the highest levels. And then law firms before Gen AI also had a bunch of workflow tools, right? Tools like Kira and other technologies to help them automate parts of things like diligence, contract review, reviewing documents in a discovery. And so we think those portions will accelerate. And I think a lot of the challenge in the next decade is going to be the same way in the past 2 decades from when we invented PCs, the internet. You saw law firms get significantly bigger. And a lot of the challenge of the law firms in the past 20 years were figuring out how do we scale and operate with thousands of attorneys. Now the problem is I can give you, maybe tens of thousands of AI legal agents. And how do you put those into your broader operating system as a company and make sure the same way before that the client data is secure, you're able to do work and it's profitable. And so I think a lot of it is figuring that out. And I don't think we often get the question of, is billables going to go to fixed fee? How is this going to change? And I think where law firms are so challenging is there isn't a single way that they operate. They are really this collection of all these different practice areas, right? And so what this is going to look like for M&A is going to look different than what it looks like for capital markets or fund formation or litigation. And so a lot of the interesting conversations we're having now with law firms is practice area by practice area, starting to think about how do you do this specific practice area in a new way? What is the ROI that clients care about for this practice area? And how do clients want this practice area delivered, where the way a private equity firm wants to do fund formation in the future is going to look very different than how a Fortune 500 company wants their litigation portfolio managed. And so I think there's going to be a lot of room for differentiation. And I think the answer is so complex that I think we have some intuitions, and the law firms we work with have some intuitions, but it is really going to be a decade of figuring out how all these things fit together and what that future model looks like.
I suggest, because with a group of researchers, we prepared a second global report on the state of AI in legal practice, where we researched over 800 law firms and in-house departments, how they approach AI. So we have data where others have intuition. Billing hours business model is one of the biggest threats, challenges for law firms to overcome to be able to use AI. But it requires, like you mentioned, educating them practice by practice, law firm by law firm. But I would like to ask you about something else, maybe a bit of politics, geopolitics. At the AI conference in Singapore, where I was a speaker, many raised concerns that the global south risks being left behind in the legal infrastructure. We speak about concerns regarding privacy or secrecy, professional secrecy. They are afraid of being left without AI. How do you think we can avoid this divide? And do you see that tools like Harvey may play a role in making access to justice more equal?
Yes, we're actually working with the Supreme Court of Singapore and their court systems to start figuring out ways we can use this technology for access to justice. And so, I think one of the broader missions of this company is how can we use this technology to address things exactly like that? And I think there is a huge opportunity across the world to use this technology, if you can figure out the right ways to use this, to provide access to justice, to provide better legal infrastructure for everyone. And so part of why we want to scale and why we were in, I think 56 different countries is to provide it to kind of all these folks. And so I think we have seen this be less of an issue. We're working with firms in all these countries, and so hopefully we can do our small part there.
I keep my fingers crossed to achieve it, because it's really important. And last question, maybe a very private one. I have a 17-year-old daughter who dreams of studying law at top law school. Would you still encourage her to pursue law in this AI era, because it's what she asks me quite often? And what kind of profession do you think she would be entering by the time she graduates?
Yeah, I would say that if someone's passionate about the law, I think now is as good of a time as ever to go into it. I think you've heard this also in the programming space where some people have said, "Oh, programming's over. These models are so good at programming." And what we've seen at our company, and my very strong intuition, having worked with some of the best programmers in the world at Google, is in the next decade, these models aren't going to be doing the work that the most senior law firm partners or the most senior engineers do. But I think the very big opportunity is one, they are going to completely transform how you educate that next generation of professionals. If I think about when I was learning to program over a decade ago, I had to go on forums and try to figure things out. And most things I couldn't learn because I was like, I can't figure this out. It's going to take too much time, or I don't have a teacher to teach me. And now with these models, I could learn any programming language, any concept until I get to a very high level. And so if I think about if I was starting over, I would still learn the same things I was learning. I could just learn them much more deeply. And so I think you'll see a couple things. One is I think you can see people specialize in more domains. And so if you can learn these topics faster, you can go deeper and get much more specialized, or you can get more breadth. And I think then the work will also change, kind of like you said, of there'll be this shift of a lot of the work will look more like senior work earlier on, where a lot of our engineers now are managing 10 agents that are all writing software. And what you're actually learning is this higher level of cognition or abstraction of how to work, where when you become a really senior engineer, the work isn't writing the code. The work is how do I delegate all of the projects to the team so that they can all work in parallel, and then I can combine all of their work. And so I think people will be able to learn that sooner. And then the most important part is when I think about the best engineers or the best partners, law firm partners that we've worked with, the technical understanding is super important, but that's only one piece of it. There is the understanding of the business, of the clients, of entrepreneurship, and what are you using this technology to do? And so my sense is for both of these roles, I actually think the skills are going to become more valuable. Like Winston and I talk about this, where our guess is in the next 10 years, the most successful partners will actually be more profitable than in the past 10 years because they will have more leverage. They can help more clients. And I think you'll see the same thing with programming, where kind of like you said, you'll see individuals be able to start larger companies, and then you'll also see people at larger companies be more effective. So I would say the important thing to look at these professions is ones where the skill cap is so high that the models aren't going to saturate it. And I think both legal and profession, you can kind of keep going. There isn't a ceiling to how good you can get at these professions. And so I don't think we're anywhere close to that.
Thank you for this great advice. I will pass it to her, and I will still attract her to legal profession. Thank you for sharing your insights and vision for future of legal AI. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's been fascinating to hear not just about Harvey, but about where you see the entire legal profession is heading. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to Monday Bagel, leave a review, share it with your colleagues who care about the future of law and technology, and try Harvey. Until next time, bye-bye.